Hello, my name is Anastasia, and for my ESOL comprehension strategy, I chose Chapter 9's Read Aloud Plus. It's very similar to just your traditional read aloud, but you're just adding an extra extension to, or extension activity rather, I'm sorry, to the read aloud. So as far as steps go, you're going to first choose a book, pre-read it, mark the questionings that you want, the different activities. Obviously, if it's a smaller book and you're more in a primary grade, then you're not going to have a long list of extension activities that you can do with just one book. Since I'm in a 5th grade classroom, I have that availability to do a tiny extension all the way up to a large extension. So for this one, I just kind of chose to go on the simpler side of how a few simple photos can just add that extension to the read aloud that some students may not understand, because before this I didn't even know what a silkworm looked like. So it's not good just for the students, it's good for you too. So step 1 was choosing the book, rereading or pre-reading it, choosing your activity, and the points where your vocabulary, your concepts, what you want the children to take from it. Step 2 is actually reading it loud to the students and then modeling for them what that fluent reading and expression sounds like. The 3rd and 4th step are they're not really chronological, they're just more important things to remember. So you want to actively engage your students. So that means that you're using this extension activity during, immediately after, like you need to make those connections immediately with the text and what you want them to remember from it or comprehend. Mostly a lot of text, especially if you're following like the storyline or something, you can do a lot of charting with it. For mine right now, you can't really do too much charting, so that's not one that I chose to show you. And then the other important thing to remember is that you want to be reviewing those key concepts with them. So whatever you're pulling out, you're making connections, you're keeping that chart visually displayed for the students so they can refer back to it, especially in something like this where it is such a large book, and then there could be something from the beginning that they may not remember fully once they're in the middle or in the end, and you can just be like, hey, look at this. You remember when we talked about this? So the most important thing is that it's making those connections, it's making it stick for the students. The last step is that you're going to assess and monitor the students and any kind of growth that they may have. So if you do choose an extension activity where it's like writing, paraphrasing through illustration, you can take that, you can use that for like portfolio on performance, and then while they're sort of doing the activity though, you still want to make sure that you're going around and you're taking anecdotals, you're helping them clarify any misconceptions, and the last important thing to remember is that technology is your friend. Go online, find the photos. Go find real life images of mountains and fish and just different concepts or different families, and show them that the cookie cutter or what your background knowledge is may not be what everyone else's background knowledge is, so you can help them build on what they need to be successful in comprehending whatever text you do choose. So for my read aloud, I'm just going to read a tiny bit of it. Background story of my book. It is the Project Mulberry. A Korean student moves into a new town. She has lived in America before, so it's not a complete culture shock, but she is feeling rather self-conscious about her own heritage, and she just kind of wants to make American friends and fit in. And for her first friend that she makes, Patrick, he wants to do a science project with her for the state fair, but they can't choose anything. So her mother suggests, her mother's Korean, suggests that they do a project on silkworms, and the main character is sort of reluctant at first, but when she tells her best friend, he thinks it's the grandest idea ever and they have to do it. So I'm pushing through to where the eggs are hatching. Day 17 was a Sunday. I slept in a little. When I got out of bed, the clock said 8:57. I did the usual, washed up, got dressed, went downstairs, and checked on the eggs. The commas had been uncurling over the past few days. I wonder what she means by commas. Last night, some of them looked like little rings, a black outline with a clear center. Maybe she's talking about the eggs. I think she thinks she's referring to the eggs when she says comma. I lifted the screen lid and peered inside. There were a whole bunch of tiny black hairs on the leaves. How the heck had the hairs gotten there? Kenny? Had Kenny put hairs in the aquarium, maybe thinking the worms could use hairs to make nests? What an idiot. They weren't birds. But it was weird because these weren't like hairs that you'd pull out of a hairbrush. They were much too short and tiny. Where had he gotten them? And what was he doing messing with the aquarium? If he'd done anything bad to those eggs, I'd think of the very worst thing that I could do and then do something worse than that. I put the lid down, leaned against my leg, and reached in to brush away the hairs and froze with my hand an inch above the glass bowl because I thought I saw the hairs moving. I blinked, then stared for a second. The hairs were so tiny that I almost couldn't tell. Were they moving? Yes. There it went again. Tiny, tiny wiggles. Wiggles. They weren't hairs. They were worms. Little tiny itsy bitsy worms. Our eggs had hatched. I hopped up and down, forgetting the lid was leaning against my leg. It crashed down and landed on my bare foot, which hurt, but I was too excited to really notice. Still, the pain calmed me down a little, and I picked up the lid and put it carefully back on the aquarium, so I wouldn't jump or jar it or scare the poor little things. I took one last look through the glass, then ran inside to call Patrick. So I just kind of wanted to model for you a little bit of fluent reading. Behind me, I have up there a silkworm life cycle. So I would use this as we went through the books. This is something that I would keep relying back to. Starting off with that they got eggs from a moth. The moth lays the eggs onto the leaves. In the book, the two students keep going back and putting new leaves in there, thinking that the eggs are bound to hatch anytime soon, and they just want them to have fresh food. And again, the leaves are mulberry leaves, so that's why the book is called Project Mulberry. So there's little connections that you can make everywhere. But the main thing that I wanted to get from this was that they have the little eggs. Here they look more like rings, which she sort of called them rings in the book, but she also called them commas. So I would try to look for maybe other pictures, or when this is something that I'm doing in the class is growing silkworms. So I would actually, when they got to that stage, I would be like, do you remember in the book when she said that they looked like commas? How do you observe them right now? So again, making connections throughout the whole entire text, engaging them actively is most important. And then here is the picture of it when it hatched, and it's a tiny little black line, almost like a little black hair. And then for my other pictures, I chose this one, which is just kind of them hatched out. So they kind of look like caterpillars, but obviously they cocoon and turn into moths and not butterflies, so they're slightly different. But the big thing that I didn't really know is that they weave their cocoon in like with their own threading, their own webbing, almost like how a spider has, and it's silk. So when people make any kind of clothing or products out of silk, they actually unwind silkworms' cocoons. So that's another interesting fact that you could kind of just talk to the kids about. But yeah, like I said, charting, visuals, any kind of connections and active engagement that you can give to the students is just so much better than reading to them and showing them what a fluent reader is. You want them to be able to understand, make connections, and read the book, so they're coming away with as much knowledge as possible. Thanks.